Well, we do have a big update coming last night. The ACC, we all know they're currently considering Cal and Stanford. I think many of us would agree that seems extremely unrealistic that either Cal and Stanford would join the ACC, but we might have gotten a realistic option for the conference. SMU now apparently in talks, possibly looking at joining the conference, depending. SMU has a $10 million exit fee to leave the ACC with less than 27 months notice, so that number could double in May. ACC source told the Action Network the league had no interest in expanding, and that has changed. And let me just give a big picture reason why I think that this is the case, and I think the ACC now trying to play offense, now looking into Cal, Stanford, SMU. Before all of this, I want to say, if they get any of these teams to join the league, that does not ruin the grant of rights that they have. And obviously, it wouldn't make any sense if you're the ACC and you're trying to hold on to Clemson and FSU. Why would you dissolve the grant of rights? That's your one massive leverage chip you have against those universities from leaving to the SEC or to the Big Ten. So if any team joins the ACC, they still have that rock solid grant of rights. And like Stanford, to me, there's just no chance. The only way I can see Stanford joining the ACC is if they know for a fact the Big Ten does not want them, which makes no sense. I think the Big Ten wants Stanford. It's just going to take time. But it's if the Big Ten does not want Stanford and Stanford is obsessed with being in a Power 4 league, because obviously we don't have a Power 5. But if they really want to be in a Power 4 league, I could see them saying, 1,000%, we will join the ACC. We will sacrifice our travel over the Big 12 because Stanford's already declined joining the Big 12. It's just not an academic fit, and I would agree with Stanford there. So, you could maybe see it with Stanford, but it just seems very unlikely. California, the travel is just so crazy. You would be getting around 41 million. I don't know. And then SMU. So this is where it gets interesting, because it's the idea, if FSU and Clemson can bully their way out of the ACC, you would figure it would be through some ridiculous buyout, something like that. Let's say it happens, right? But no other teams in the ACC can get out. So now the ACC is on the offense, trying to hunt and replace Clemson and FSU, kind of like the Big 12 losing Oklahoma and Texas. And I think they would look at SMU. I also think they would look at maybe Memphis, maybe South Florida. We'll get to them in a little bit, but it's not surprising at all. They're talking to SMU. And it says the finances are the most significant piece to potential ACC expansion. ACC schools are handcuffed for another 13 years with that ESPN contract, and they are making around $39 million per year. I believe that's going up to $41 million. In expanding, the league must avoid reducing the annual distribution paid to each team to supplement new schools. That is a non-starter, according to several people they've talked to. Yeah, I mean, think about it. Clemson and FSU are already making below market value. Are they going to get their shares cut even more to have SMU join the conference? That cannot happen. A perk of the ESPN contract, the network is required to increase its base distribution to the conference in a way that pays each new member the same annual rate as others. And also, I think if this happens, if the ACC starts expanding, they're going to add another conference game, which will also make the league more valuable and make ESPN more money because they will be given more content every single year. However, financial complications go much deeper. To offset the additional travel costs of acquiring Stanford, Cal, and or SMU, current ACC members will need additional revenue from the network, or Stanford and Cal would have to agree to enter the league for a partial share. Conversations which are ongoing. Seems very, very unlikely that's going to be worked out, where it's just logistically, it's a nightmare. While the ACC debates the value of adding the 3 schools, the Mountain West is also holding their own discussions. They are talking to Oregon State and Washington State. the big question for Oregon State and Washington State. Do you wait a year and try and get into the Big 12 next year? Because apparently right now the Big 12, they're closed for business. They'll probably, do something next year. Would you wait? I do think Oregon State and Washington State would be good fits for the Big 12, but that's going to be a Big 12 decision. Would they want Oregon State and Washington State, or would they want to go full basketball and get UConn and San Diego State instead? That's a tough gamble if you're Oregon State and Washington State. Would you just want to join the Mountain West or wait? I would probably wait if I were them, but at some point you need a dance partner because the Pac-12 is just, there's 4 teams left. How are you going to come together with a schedule? It's just impossible. You have to be in some league. Time is running out. Another option being explored is a merger of sorts with the Pac-12's 4 remaining programs in an effort to retain the Pac-12 brand and potentially keep some other perks. Those conversations are ongoing. It's unclear if a reformed Pac-12 would retain either A5 status or the higher college football distribution. In light of the latest realignment situation, the college football playoff is expected to examine changes to the revenue distribution model and the format. And of course, they will be changing that, it's probably to the 4 automatic bids for the Power 4 leagues, and then everything else will just be an at-large best team available. That's kind of the working theory right now. But either way, there is big stuff going on. You can see, curious as to why Memphis isn't being mentioned in these ACC convos. Yeah, so am I. And this was a rumor. It's like, SMU, it makes sense. I get it. But Memphis, it seems like, based on where they're located, they would be another team. I know Memphis right now, they are in desperate need of a massive stadium renovation that they're trying to raise funds for. They've had problems doing that. If Memphis gets passed on by the ACC, then it's time for an uncomfortable conversation. Seems like some fans getting very angry about it. They want Memphis to go to the ACC. No one is talking about them. I do think right now, the reason this is so weird is because if FSU and Clemson leave, you would have to figure that other schools would follow them. But is this a Big 12 situation where they might it can't be a Big 12 situation because the Big 12 TV contract was ending. And Oklahoma and Texas still had to pay, I think, a big fee to leave a year early. So it's weird. There's 13 years remaining on the contract. If FSU and Clemson get out, you have to assume other teams in that conference will have the ability to get out and possibly go to the Big Ten. That's when you start talking about Virginia to the Big Ten, North Carolina to the Big Ten, things like that. Miami to possibly the Big Ten or the SEC. I think they fit the SEC better, but either way, that's why this whole thing is tricky. Like, is there a scenario where only FSU and Clemson leave and they go to the SEC, so the SEC makes a response to the Big Ten, adding Oregon and Washington, but all the other teams in the ACC stay, and they add like Memphis and SMU? Because it just doesn't feel like they're going to be able to add California and Stanford. The travel costs, taking them on at a lower rate. I understand why Stanford would be interested in the ACC. It's more money than the Big 12, and it's way better academics, and I know they care about that. California, if I'm California, I would be very interested too in the ACC, but it just seems very problematic. It seems like a travel nightmare, and it's a different situation to where maybe ESPN can help coax this in. It just depends how much ESPN cares about getting a 10:30 game because they don't have that window. Fox controls that window right now because of the Big Ten situation, controlling USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington. They might be obsessed with getting a 10:30 game, so they might say, listen, we will give you a better deal because we already have this great deal with the ACC. We can afford it. Actually, I don't even know if ESPN can afford it. They're doing mass layoffs. I'm sure people have heard about those, but this is all speculation. We will have to see what happens on that. Any type of expansion that would reduce the estimated $39.5 million annual distribution to existing members was a non-starter, but the university, this is SMU. The university is willing to forego conference distribution pay for their first several years in the ACC should they receive an invitation to join the conference. SMU would face a reported $10 million exit fee if they leave. So SMU is really game to join the ACC. They're saying, listen, we don't even need the distribution for the first few years. We're going to sacrifice it, with the idea that we're going to get paid more down the line. So SMU very interested right now in possibly joining the ACC. And it does make complete sense. The big question is, if they do somehow get Cal, Stanford, and SMU, who do they add on? Because you would figure you'd want an even number of teams. Who would they add on after that? Would it be a Memphis? Would it be a South Florida, who is in the process currently of breaking ground on a new stadium? Would it be a team like Washington State and Oregon State to try and get their own West Wing? Oh, man, that would be something, wouldn't it? An ACC West Wing to counter, and also add in Boise State as well. But guys, all of this depends on what Clemson and FSU are able to do, because I've also gotten rumors and I've heard stuff. Clemson is just as aggressive, if not more aggressive, as FSU about trying to get out of the ACC. They're just doing it behind the scenes. They don't want to make a big fuss about it like FSU is doing. It's probably a smarter way, honestly, to go about it. But you also do have to come out publicly like FSU and let people know this is what we want to do. We're not getting paid enough. We might have to go to an unequal revenue distribution. That would obviously disenfranchise some of those other teams. They've already signed the TV deal. It would get really, really messy at that point, but you could do possibly different bonuses or some type of structure like that. Either way, right now, we're looking at Stanford, California, SMU, and then maybe another team from the American. Maybe it's South Florida. Maybe it's Memphis, possibly going to the ACC as the ACC looks around. And it's kind of like a weird moment to where you're like, okay, we have a Power 4 right now. There's no more Power 5. It's a Power 4. And if you're the ACC, you look around, the Big 10 is adding teams. The SEC is adding teams. The Big 12 is adding teams. And they're like, okay, so maybe if we want to keep this conference together, we should show our strength. We should add teams. Maybe we try and get our own West Wing with Stanford, Cal, Washington State, and Oregon State. But how does all of that get paid for? I mean, this is not a Big Ten situation where they've got tons of money. USC and UCLA are looking at it and saying, even if we have the worst travel in the world, it still makes complete sense to do this. And then Chip Kelly comes out with an amazing quote here and says, Notre Dame is an independent in football, but they're in a conference for everything else. Why aren't we all independent for football? Take the 64 teams in the Power 5 and make that one division. Take 64 teams in Group of 5, make that another division. We play for a championship, they play for a championship, and no one else gets affected. Our sport is different than everyone else. We only play once a week. Travel is not a big deal for football, but it is a big deal for other sports. And yes, this is the whole idea. So the problem that we're running into right now, all of these administrations are making decisions on which conference to join because of one sport. They do not care about any other sport. They are doing it for football, and it's understandable because football keeps the other sports afloat. All the other sports operate in a negative. They wouldn't even exist without college football. So obviously the administrations are going to say, whatever gets us the most money, we do not care about travel. It does not matter. We want to make more money. The only reason these other sports exist is because of college football. The problem is it's going to create massive travel problems for other sports because they play more than the football teams do. So it's like you're making decisions based off of college football, and then it's going to affect other things. Should college football be a separate entity than everything else? It's an interesting conversation starter, but guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.